بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So this is lesson number 7 in our series on the book of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Al-Ubudiyyah, and with the commentary, with the explanation of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan Hafidhahullah. In the previous lesson, we looked at how Shaykh al-Islam spoke about the meaning of the word abd, which is servant, and how the word abd carries two meanings. The first meaning, which is universal to everybody, it includes the believer, the disbeliever, it includes the sinful person, the pious person. And so this is as it relates to Allah's creation, the laws in Allah's creation. Everybody is subject to the same laws. So, things like food and drink and illness and health and life and death and all of its processes and mechanisms and the laws that govern Allah's creation, everybody is subject to them, and everybody is equally subject to them. And so no one can escape from being subject to these laws. So this is what we mean by the universal type of ubudiyyah, meaning the universal type of servitude. You cannot escape this. There's no way you can escape this. You can't, try to jump off a mountain and try to fly, because that's Allah's law in His creation. You will fall and you will perish, whether you are a believer or whether you are a disbeliever. There's no difference. And so every creature within Allah's creation has certain laws that govern it. Allah gave it its particular creation, and then He gave it its particular qualities and characteristics, features and abilities. So everyone comes under this servitude. Angels, jinn, men, creatures, trees, elements, the water, everything. It comes as a slave, as a servant to Allah Azza wa Jal. The sun is subjugated by Allah. The moon is subjugated by Allah. The stars are subjugated by Allah. So everything is in servitude to Allah, and there is no difference between the believer and the disbeliever, the hypocrite or the genuine believer. Everyone is equivalent. So in this respect, all we are doing is we are witnessing Allah's creation and acknowledging the various laws and rules that govern that creation, and we acknowledge that it is Allah Azza wa Jal who placed all of these things. So this is one meaning of the word abd, but this is not the type of servitude that the messengers and the prophets and the revealed books call to. The servitude that is requested is to worship Allah with humble compliance coupled with love, that we love Allah and we worship Him with humility, and that we enter into His servitude willingly, that which is done willingly by obeying Him and obeying His messengers and worshipping Him and following His law. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, we continue, he develops this this understanding between the abd, which is of the first type, which is really the linguistic meaning, and the abd, which is of the second type, that we must be very clear, that we clearly understand the difference between these two different understandings of what it means by servitude. And if we do not, then we will fall into severe mistakes, as people fell into in history, and which we shall explore inshallah ta'ala in today's lesson. So he continues and he says, وَبِالْفَرْقِ بَيْنَ هَذَيْنَ النَّوْعَيْنِ, knowing the difference between these two types, meaning the difference between abd, which is universal in its meaning, and abd, a slave or a servant, which is very specific in its meaning in the religious sense. If we understand the difference between these two meanings of abd, then we will have understood the difference between the religious reality, al-haqa'iq or al-haqiqa ad-diniyya, the religious reality, right? And what is this? This is everything that enters into the religion, the worship of Allah, and whatever is from His religion, whatever He commanded, whatever He loves, whatever He is pleased with, right? Those things by which we should ally with other believers, right? And so on and so forth, right? Those things by which Allah rewards a person with paradise. All of this is the religious reality, right? This is al-haqiqa ad-diniyya, which the messengers call to, right? So we should know the distinction between this one, the religious reality, and the worldly or the creational reality, right? The creational reality, al-haqiqa al-kawniyya, that which relates to the creation. And this is the one where everybody is equal, the believer, the disbeliever, the pagan, the polytheist, the hypocrite, the righteous person, the sinful person, the man, the woman, the animal, the tree, everybody is a slave to Allah, you know, in terms of the creational reality. So in other words, if we first understand clearly the difference between an abd, which is a slave to Allah in the creational sense, and an abd, which is a slave to Allah in the religious sense, this will then also allow us to understand the difference between the religious reality and the creational reality, right? So in other words, where we are leading onto from this discussion is, as will become clear inshallah, is if you ask someone, what is it that the prophets and messengers call to, he could give you one of two answers. He could say to you that the prophets and messengers came to call to the creational reality. In other words, the prophets and messengers came to inform us that we are all slaves to Allah. We with the meaning that we are governed by His laws in creation, that He is the one who put these laws, that we that He's the one who creates us. He's the one who put in the systems of the way that we acquire our sustenance. He's the one who made water to be the source of life. He's the one who, so he keeps going on and describing everything from the creational reality, right? Which is what we look at in the creation, and things that we study, and things that we know are put there and created and subjected by Allah Azza wa Jal for our use, right? So he keeps going on and describing all of these things. And he thinks that this is what the prophets and messengers came to call to, the creational reality. And that you become a believer just by affirming all of these things, all of these things which are from the qadr, the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal, the things which He's created, the causes and the effects, the ways and the means, right? So he keeps going on and describing all of these things, and he claims that this is what the prophets and messengers came to call to, and if you accept this, if you believe in this, in the creational reality, you have therefore become a believer. And this is completely wrong. This is incorrect, because the prophets and messengers did not come to call to this. Rather, they came to argue by way of the creational reality, to argue by way of it, to point to the religious reality. Right? To point to the religious reality. So let me explain the difference by giving an everyday example that everybody can relate to. So if you imagine that with respect to your parents, that you think that just to acknowledge the favors that they raised you, that they provided for you, that they, fed you, that they went through all of that, that effort in order to raise you, you think that being grateful to them is simply to acknowledge these facts. And that's it. Right? Simply to have knowledge of these facts. Right? So long as you have knowledge that my parents raised me, brought me up, had patience with me, fed me, stayed awake all night to console me, or whatever it might be, that as long as you merely acknowledge these facts and hold them as knowledge in your heart and mind, that this is all that is required from you. And that it is not needed for you to act upon what this knowledge necessitates from you, what this knowledge demands from you, what this knowledge points to, right? This knowledge points to that you must be grateful to them, physically, actually, in your deeds, in your speech, in your behavior, in your interactions with them, because that knowledge is something that demands this. It is not just mere knowledge by itself. So the one who says that I am being grateful to my parents merely by acknowledging that they fed me, raised me, clothed me, sheltered me, and so on and so forth, then everybody would laugh at this person. A person would reject this claim. A person would say this is a false claim, right? Because, the mere knowledge in itself isn't what is requested from you. Rather, the knowledge is something that makes something else necessary. So in the same way, those people who say that the prophets and messengers called to the creational reality, and as long as you affirm that, and as long as you believe that, then you are a believer. This is completely false. And this is actually an invalidation of Islam itself, because the prophets and messengers, they didn't come to call to something that everybody is already in agreement with, because all of the people of the earth, they are in agreement that there is a creator, provider, sustainer, and so on and so forth, right? There's no dispute about this issue. So once we understand this very, very clearly, then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he points to how mankind is divided into three groups. There are three broad categories of people in the context of this discussion that we are having. And so he describes them. He says that he says that there is the creational reality in which the believer and the disbeliever, the sinful and the righteous, all of them are basically equal. They are all equal in this. And So he goes on to explain, and then Sheikh Al-Fawzan, he simplifies this passage, and he basically says to us that basically the people are of three categories in relation to this issue of the abd and of the creational reality and the religious reality. Then the people are divided into three groups. So he says, الناس مع التوحيد ثلاثة أنواع. The people in relation to Tawheed are of three categories. النوع الأول, the first type, من أقر بالربوبية ولم يعبد الله فإنه كافر من أتباع إبليس. The one who affirms Allah's lordship but who does not worship him. Right? So he now affirms the creational reality. He knows there is a Lord. He knows there is a creator who's put all of these things in place, but he does not worship him. He refuses to worship him. This person is a disbeliever, and he is from the followers of Iblis, because Allah commanded him and he did not follow the command. Right? So this is now a disbeliever on the basis of arrogance and pride and refusal, rejection, Iyaad, stubborn denial, and so on and so forth. So amongst mankind are people who are basically like this. The second group are those who they acknowledge Allah's rububiyyah. They know that He is the creator, provider, sustainer. They worship Him. So they do give Him worship and they do give Him obedience, but they also worship other things alongside Allah Azza wa Jal. So here now they are committing shirk. So these are the polytheists, these are the pagans, these are the mushrikun, those who worship other things alongside Allah. So irrespective of what that might be, they might worship a tree, they might worship an idol, they might worship the jinn, they might worship angels, they might worship, the prophets, like some of them do, like the Christians worship Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. They might worship, whatever they might worship. So they now are associating partners with Allah Azza wa Jal. They give Him some worship, but they also give other things worship alongside Him. So these people, they are mushrikun, polytheists, pagans. And the third group are those who worship Allah alone, without any partners, but they may fall short in obeying Him. So they might fall into some sins, they might neglect some obligations, they might fall into that which is haram, right? Then these people are believers, they are worshippers of Allah, they are ibadullah, they are the servants of Allah with the religious reality. And to the extent that they fall into sin and disobedience, then obviously their iman is deficient, and their loyalty and friendship with Allah is deficient, to the extent that they are deficient in their religious obligations. And so these are the three categories that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, that he mentions. And this is a discussion that follows on from the discussion about the abd and ibadah and ubudiyyah, and likewise the creational reality and the religious reality. Now, once this is clear, the Shaykh says, Shaykh al-Islam, وَهَذَا مَقَامٌ عَظِيمٌ فِيهِ غَلِطَ الْغَالِطُونَ وَكَثُرَ فِيهِ الْإِشْتِبَاهِ على السالكين. So he says that this is a great and mighty station, meaning the station of the religious reality. And many people have fallen into mistakes with respect to it. And a lot of confusion has entered into this affair. Meaning in the affair of Tawheed and the affair of worship. What is the Tawheed that the messengers called to? What is the worship that Allah has enjoined upon us? And who is the mushrik? Who is the polytheist? And who is the monotheist? Who is the muwahhid? And who is the muwahhid? And who is the disbeliever? And who is the believer? All of these things are impacted by, having a thorough grasp of these issues. And, who is the pious believer and who is the sinful believer? All of these things, because we are now speaking about the status of people and Allah's ruling upon such people, and who is a believer, who is a disbeliever, unless we are clear about these issues, there will be great confusion, where all of the lines are blurry. We do not really know who is a believer in Allah and a pious friend of Allah, and who is an enemy of Allah. We no longer have that distinction if we can't make these important distinctions. So this is why this is very, very important. And there were Muslim groups, scholars, sects which appeared, who fell into the likes of these affairs. And, we're going to explore this a bit more, inshallah ta'ala. And the Sheikh says that this is an issue until even some of the, حتى زلق فيه من أكابر الشيوخ المدعين التحقيق والتوحيد والعرفان مما لا يحصيهم إلا الله الذي يعلم السر والإعلان. He says this matter is such that even many of the major people who are taken as great sheikhs, those people who claimed to arrive at tawheed and what is correct, and who claim to have knowledge, such a large number of these types of people even went astray, whose number only Allah knows, meaning that a great number of them went astray in this field. And for that reason, he then makes a quotation. He cites from a great scholar of the past, and this scholar is Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah. He quotes a statement from this Sheikh, and Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah, he is from the scholars of the Hanbalis, and he came many centuries after Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. Imam Ahmad died in the year 241 Hijrah, and Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani came 2-3 centuries after that. And he was a great Hanbali scholar. He was also a pious worshipper. He was renowned for his piety and his wisdom, and he wrote a book in the Hanbali madhab called Al-Ghunya. Al-Ghunya, this is a very famous and well-known book. However, after him came Sufis, many Sufi groups, and they ascribed themselves to him. But they themselves were Sufis and grave worshippers. They were misguided, and they ascribed to him many things that he was free of. They fabricated many things against him which he was free of. And they began to raise his status, and they began to claim that he is someone that he is able to benefit people, and he is from the pious friends of Allah, and if you go through him and even invoke him and things like that, then he can bring you benefit in your worldly affairs, right? So they exaggerated in him, and he is free and innocent from them. He has nothing to do with them, because he himself was upon the correct way, upon the sound methodology. And because he was a righteous man, these people came and they exaggerated in him because of his righteousness. And then they obviously went astray, and they led many other people astray. So now this scholar, he made a very important statement, and he said, in what is related from him, he said, Shaykh al-Islam says, فيما ذكر عنه فبين أن كثيرا من الرجال إذا وصلوا إلى القضاء والقدر أمسكوا. So he says that there are certain types of people. There are many men, many people of the earth, many people from among the Muslims. What they do is when they reach al-qada wal-qadar, they halt at that point. When they reach al-qada wal-qadar, they halt at that point. What does this mean? What does this mean? What he means to say, as Sheikh Al-Fawzan explains, is that when they see things happening in Allah's creation, when they see things like sins and disobedience, when they see, for example, a man drinking, or a man gambling, or a man abandoning his obligations, right? And all the various other types of sins, and even what the people of disbelief do, what they do is they halt at this point, meaning that they believe that Allah Azza wa Jal, from His decree, from His qadar, He has basically decreed these acts of disobedience upon these people. And therefore, because it is from Allah's decree, we must accept it. We must accept it. Right? So, in other words, what they are doing is, the only thing they see is Allah's decree, that Allah decrees things happen by way of Allah's decree. And so what they see people committing sin, they see people committing shirk, and they think that because Allah has decreed this to happen, that to accept it is part and parcel, to be happy with it, to accept it and to be happy with it and not to challenge it, is part and parcel of believing in Allah's decree. In other words, Allah must be pleased with this if He's decreed it. If Allah's decreed it, if Allah's decreed sin upon somebody, He must be pleased with that. And so, now this is a tremendous, tremendous mistake, because it is not permissible for us to think like this and for us to stop at this point. And this is because Allah Azza wa Jal has given everybody a free choice. He has given everybody a free will. He's given everybody the ability, the capabilities to act and to choose. Everybody has the ability to choose to pray, to choose to fast, to choose to be obedient. Everybody has the ability to either be nice to his children or to be horrible to his children. Everybody has the ability to choose to be nice to his neighbor or to be horrible to his neighbor. Everyone has choice. It's not as if you have been forced to do what you do. Everyone has choice. So you have the choice to pray and to fast and to give charity and to strive in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. So all of this, everybody has Kudra, ability. Everybody has istita'a, which is the ability, the prior ability to act. Right? Everybody has al-ikhtiyar, which is choice. Everybody has the ability to choose. You have limbs. You have a heart by which you think and feel and reflect. Right? Everybody has all of these things. So therefore, to think that to accept all of the sin and disobedience and disbelief and polytheism and all the mixture of religions, to think that one must accept them because it is part and parcel of Allah's decree, because Allah has decreed them, and because He's decreed them and they are from His, from what He has created, therefore we must accept it. This is a tremendous and huge mistake. And this is what Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, this is what he means when he says, كَثِيرًا مِنَ الرِّجَالِ, many among the men, إِذَا وَصَلُوا إِلَى الْقَضَاءِ وَالْقَدَرِ أَمْسَكُوا. Many people, many men, when they reach this level of acknowledgement of the qada and qadar, Allah's decree and ordainment, they halt, they stop. And then he continues, إِلَّا أَنَا, except for me. فَإِنِّي انفتحت لي فيه روزنة فنازعت أقدار الحق بالحق للحق. He says, except for me, for indeed I dispute the decrees of the truth with the truth for the truth. والرجل من يكون منازعا للقدر لا من يكون موافقا للقدر. And a man is he who contends with qadar. He contends with qadar, not the one who conforms to al-qadar. All right. Now these are tremendous statements. We must understand what he means. We've already explained the first half of what he said. He said there are many people who halt at al-qada wal-qadar, meaning they look around them, they see what is taking place in the creation, they see sins, they see disobedience, they see disbelief, they see polytheism, they see all these things, and they think, because Allah has decreed these affairs, therefore I must accept them. They must be valid, they must be acceptable, because Allah has willed them, Allah has decreed them. And this is a huge mistake, right? Many people, they stop and they think that this is the religion that Allah is pleased with, meaning to accept everything. Why? Because it's all happening by Allah's decree. Therefore, Allah must be pleased with it. And this is wrong. And then he says that although there are many men which are like this, except for me, meaning not me, for indeed I dispute with qadar, I contend with qadar, the decrees of the truth, meaning Allah, with the truth, for the truth. And a man is he who contends with qadar, not the one who basically, complies and conforms. Now what does this mean? What does this mean? He means to say that I am not someone who just looks around himself and sees things taking place, people committing sin, people committing disbelief, people upon disbelief, people following false religion, people worshipping idols, people worshipping men, stars, jinn, trees, and so on and so forth. And I see all of this, I do not stop there. People opposing the sunnah, people entering innovation, people entering bid'ah, people entering heresies. I don't stop at this point and accept it all. Because I hold on to the legislation of Allah, what Allah commanded, what He legislated, right? So now we have two things. We have what Allah has decreed, what Allah decrees from His wisdom, and then we have what Allah legislates also from His wisdom. Right? So in other words, he is saying that I look at everything and I don't stop at that. I don't halt at that. I take hold of the legislation, whatever Allah has commanded. And then I also treat the decree of Allah, I treat it through the command of Allah, right? So I take the legislation of Allah, I take what He's commanded, and then I use it to understand and to treat whatever He has decreed, right? So in other words, I take from the decree of Allah, this is the decree of Allah, and I also take the legislation of Allah, whatever He's commanded, and then I act upon it. And this is also from the decree of Allah. Right? So in other words, that when I see all this happening around me and people doing what they are doing, I do not just accept this. I do not accept it as an argument that just because Allah's decreed it, He must be happy with it, and I must, and I therefore must be happy with it. I don't stop at that, unlike many other people. Rather, I contend against this decree by the legislation of Allah. So meaning that when I see someone committing a sin, I contend against that. I contend against that decree of Allah by something else which is also from the decree of Allah, which is obedience to Allah. Right? Likewise, I see someone who is committing shirk with Allah. I contend against that decree. I oppose that decree, and I do so through the legislation of Allah, which is also from the decree of Allah. So I worship Allah alone. I do not associate any partners with Him. And that itself is from Allah's decree. Allah is the one who's willed this action upon me. So I fight Al-Qadr with Al-Qadr. Sins and disobedience are from Qadr, but righteousness is also from Al-Qadr. The disbelief of a disbeliever is from Qadr, Allah decreed it, but the Iman of a believer is also from Al-Qadr. Why? Because Allah has given everybody the ability to choose, and the ability to act, and the ability to do something or leave something. Everyone has that ability. And everything is from the decree of Allah. Righteous deeds are from the decree of Allah. Evil deeds are from the decree of Allah. But we cannot use the decree of Allah as an argument, as a justification for evil and shirk and disbelief to be acceptable. Right? We cannot use that as an argument. And this is where we are leading towards. Can you use the argument of Allah's decree for the justification of your own evil actions? Right? This is where we are going with this discussion. Can you use the decree of Allah as an argument to justify your own evil actions or the evil actions of other people? Can you use it to justify false religion? Can you use it to justify the religion of those who worship others besides Allah upon the argument that it is something that Allah has decreed? If He was unhappy with it, why would He decree it upon them? Is this a sound argument? Is this a valid argument? Right? So this is where we are going towards, because many people, they fell into a tremendous mistake because they wrongly thought that whatever Allah decrees, then it must be acceptable to Him. So if a thief steals, it is acceptable to Allah because He decreed it. If a person worships an idol, it is acceptable to Allah because Allah decreed it. If a person murders somebody else, it is acceptable to Allah because He decreed it. If a person worships the cross, or worships an idol, or worships Isa alayhi salam, or worships his mother, Maryam alayhi salam, he worships them, then Allah must be pleased with it because He decrees it. Is this argument correct? Because this is where we are leading to if we do not distinguish between the creational reality and the religious reality. And we do not distinguish between what it means to be an abd of Allah in the universal sense, in the creational sense, and an abd of Allah in the religious sense, in terms of the religious reality. Right? We start entering into this confusion by way of the issue of Allah's decree, Allah's al-qada wal-qadar. So, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah, this is what he says: I contend against al-Qadr with al-Qadr. Because everything is from the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. And to give an example to illustrate to you why this argument is false, and we will continue developing this in the next lesson, inshallah. But just to give you an entrance into this subject, if you imagine that you come to imagine you're traveling on a journey, and on this journey you reach a point where the road splits into two. You can either choose to go on the left hand side, and if you go on the left hand side on this path, it will take you through a dangerous town which is full of villains and murderers and thieves, and it is a very dangerous town for you to travel through, and you are likely to be mugged, you are likely to be killed, you are likely to be robbed, you are likely to have your there's a threat to life and limb and property. And then on the other hand, you have a different route. On the right hand, there's a different route, and it takes you through a nice safe, scenic view. Now, at that point, nobody stops and thinks and says to himself that because Allah has decreed for me to go through the left-hand path, through the dangerous town, through the town in which I may be killed or mugged or robbed or whatever, because Allah has decreed that for me, then I must go through that way. Nobody thinks like that. This is madness, right? Everybody knows from his own day-to-day experience that he actively makes choices, and he actively tries to seek that which is beneficial for him, and he keeps away from that which is harmful to him. Everybody knows that from his personal experience. Nobody puts his hand over the cooker when he puts when he turns on the cooker. No one puts his hand over the gas cooker and says, because Allah decreed for me to have my hand burned, then I will put my hand over the cooker. Right? This is the thinking of a fool. Nobody thinks like this. Everybody knows that he actively seeks to keep away from harm. Right. Now, if that's the case, then in the same way, when it comes to the hereafter, in the hereafter, it is no different. Right? If you want safety in the hereafter, and you want to keep away from harm in the hereafter, it is a matter of choice. It is a matter of choice. So therefore, when you choose to commit sin, when you choose to be disobedient to Allah, when you commit disbelief, you are upon disbelief, or you commit polytheism and shirk, then you have already been told by way of the books and the messengers that this will bring you harm in the hereafter. You cannot use as an excuse that it is the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. Just like you do not use the excuse, just like you do not, for example, put your hand into a fire and say, this was the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. You do not do that, right, in the worldly sense. And it is exactly the same in the religious sense. Why? Because it has become known to you that putting your hand in the fire is a means of harm in this life. And likewise, it has been established and proven upon you and upon all nations that not worshipping Allah alone and worshipping others alongside Allah will enter you in the hellfire in the hereafter. That knowledge has been made known to you. So therefore, if you choose to disobey Allah and you choose that path, then you cannot use Allah's decree as an argument. And you are in the same position as the one who puts his hand in the fire and he says, this was Allah's decree. I had no choice, this was Allah's decree, right? You are the same person, right? So when you commit a sin, when you drink alcohol, for example, when you commit fornication, for example, right? You cannot say, well, this is Allah's decree. This is Allah's decree, and I had no other choice because Allah decreed it for me. That is not a valid argument. That is not a valid argument, right? Because then you are in the same, what you are doing is the same as if you were to put your hand in a fire and say that was Allah's decree. But you don't do that because you know that putting your hand in the fire is harmful to you in this life. So in the same way, it has been made clear to you that sin, disobedience, shirk, kufr, bid'ah, and so on and so forth, that is harmful for you in the hereafter. The two things are equivalent, right? So you cannot make that argument by way of al-qadr, by way of the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. So likewise, you can't make that argument. So this is one example that can be given. And the second example that can be given to show this argument is false is that if a person makes this argument, if a person comes to you, for example, let's say a sinful Muslim, for argument's sake, and he says, look, I'm sinful, I commit sins, I gamble, I drink, but this is something that Allah has put in my decree. This is something that Allah has willed upon me. What can I do? Right? So then what you do, and I'm only giving this by way of an example. I'm not saying that you actually do this, but I'm giving it as an example. So what you do is you take, you take a stick like a baseball bat, and you smack him on the back, and you break his kneecaps. Then you go to his house and you smash his windows, and then you smash his car. Then you put acid over his car. You stab his tires. You put petrol on his front door and you burn his house down, and then you tell him, this was from the decree of Allah. It was decreed upon me to do that. And so are you happy with this? Do you accept this? And obviously he can't have any argument against this because I can argue by way of qadar for all of the damage and harm that I did to him. And he's got no argument against me. Rather, for him to be consistent, he must say, yes, I'm happy with everything. It is from the decree of Allah, whatever. You had no choice except to do what you did because Allah decreed it upon you. Now, obviously, he's not going to say that, right? Rather, he wants compensation. He's going to take you to court. He wants retribution. He wants you to pay for his car. He wants you to pay for his house. He's going to demand that. So if he's going to demand that, then how can he argue that the sin that he's doing, the disobedience that he's doing, that this now is somehow a valid argument for him? It is not a valid argument for him at all. So by this, it becomes clear that the argument by way of al-qadr to justify your sin, disobedience, shirk, bid'ah and everything else, this is invalid. It is not correct. Right? And it is not correct to argue that just because it is happening in Allah's creation, Allah's willed it to happen, therefore He must be pleased with it, and so therefore to accept it, to accept all these different religions, they are all part and parcel of Allah's decree, to accept all these different ways and paths, to accept all these actions that people are doing, which are really sinful and disobedience, that all of this is acceptable, and this is what religion is. This is what Allah wants. All of this is false argumentation, and inshallah ta'ala in the next lesson Shaykh al-Islam will continue speaking about this matter, and we will elaborate upon this a bit further through the speech of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, inshallah, and likewise from the commentary of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. So to conclude today's lesson, we basically moved into this topic of al-qadar through the previous discussion of the meaning of the word abd, and what it means, the two different meanings, and likewise the creational reality and the religious reality. And if we do not distinguish between these two, then we will start falling into the type of mistake that we have been discussing today regarding al-qadr, and using al-qadr as an argument to justify all sorts of misguidance and sin, right? This is where we will be led to. And this is what happened to many, many people in the past. So in the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala, we are going to look at how there is a refutation of this in the Quran, and how the argument by way of al-qadr is rejected by Allah Azza wa Jal. There were some people who already used it as occurs in the Quran, and so we will look at that inshallah ta'ala and continue this this discussion, the flow of this discussion in the next lesson inshallah ta'ala. So that brings us to an end to today's lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.